Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Trojan Talks. And today we have a very special guest with me today. I suppose you could call me your mindset coach. Is that what you go by? Mindset coach?
Yeah, mindset coach. We could go personal development coach, business performance coach. My favorite, though, is I like to call myself a vibe coach.
Okay, cool. So you're my vibe coach. That's what we're going with. You want to introduce yourself, Gavin, in terms of what you do. Obviously, you've just mentioned it, but a bit of a brief understanding so the audience knows.
Yeah, so my name is Gavin McHale. I work with business owners, people like Troy, mainly a lot of fitness business owners, but I do have some clients that are outside of the fitness industry. And essentially, the big thing that I do is I help them figure out A, how to overcome some of the stories and some of the mindset blocks that they may be facing, and B, really how to be more productive, how to get more out of their time, and how to make sure that they can give themselves the best chance at success.
That sounds awesome. And I think how we first met is obviously through mutual connections in a mastermind. And when I first heard about Gavin, I was one of those guys, just so people know, is one of those guys where I'm macho, macho. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm the toughest guy on earth, and I wouldn't open up to my feelings. Where, as a business owner, I'm sure you could agree, Gavin, it's very important to acknowledge the things that are holding you back, like a limiting belief, for an example, which was my
Yeah.
case. And when I first spoke to Gavin, I didn't know what to expect. But this guy's good at digging pain points. So congrats to you. But really it helped me unlock this like next level of like setting goals and also as
Yeah.
well not living in fear. So one thing that I learned from Gavin is that I feel like controlling the mind and mastering or finding mastery within your mind as well is really how you get to the next level. From your own experience, I think people are pretty interested in your own story. Like,
Yeah.
how do you get into this?
Well, let me tell you first, 5 years ago, I was exactly like Troy. I was, I was like, um, you know, this sounds cool. Thanks for sharing this mindset woo-woo bullshit with me, but can we get to like Instagram and sales and the stuff that actually matters? Because like I'm fine. I'm good with all that stuff. And what I find is the folks who are like that, and Troy, kudos to you for opening up and allowing yourself to do this work, because the folks who are like that, including me and including Troy, this is often the lowest hanging fruit that can actually help them the most, because there are some things there that they just have not acknowledged, like me. So I'll take you back a little bit on my story. Canadian guy, so of course my story includes hockey. Um, I played ice hockey growing up, and I was about one or two steps below professional hockey. I was playing junior hockey. And when I went to play junior hockey, like I had been good at everything that I had tried in my life. I was always good at hockey, and I was always good at school, and everything else I kind of just was like, nah, I don't care about that, because I wasn't as good at it. When I got to junior hockey, I experienced the first experience of failure. The first time that I was like not the best and making mistakes and losing games and all of these things, and my brain just could not comprehend it. I could not handle this failure. And so I kind of almost created these conditions. Now looking back on it, I realize I created these conditions to basically implode, and totally melted down over the course of one hockey season. Ended my chances at playing professional hockey. And then what happened, I still didn't recognize this was happening, but 10 years later, I was a personal trainer trying to build an online fitness business. This was kind of before online fitness was cool. And I noticed this pattern happening, right? Of like avoiding failure, avoiding messy action, right? Just saying, oh, I'm good enough. It's fine. I'll just kind of like stay at this mediocre level. And it kind of clicked. Like I'm doing the same thing that I was doing in hockey, where like as soon as it gets hard, I shied away. And luckily around 2018, 2019, I had a business coach who pushed me similar to how I pushed you, and was like, there is some things holding you back. You need to go and pursue failure and embrace failure, and you need to look into your limiting beliefs. And he had a whole bunch of resources for me. And when I finally dug into that, I started to realize, wow, there's a whole world here that I'm missing. There's so many things that I was not aware of that, as I like to call it now, had an emergency brake on my car. So it didn't matter how much I souped up the engine, how much I washed the car, or even if I had a Ferrari or a Camry, the emergency brake was on, so it didn't matter. And
Mm.
so that's where I started doing this work. And then I kind of got the opportunity to start doing this work with other coaches, with other business owners. And then I got the opportunity to speak to people. And that's when things really started happening, where people were like, this is exactly what I need. Even millionaires, even, multimillionaires running huge businesses were like coming up to me crying after my talks. And I'm like, there's something here where people need this work. So that's what kind of brought me here.
Awesome. One thing that I suppose a lot of people are thinking about right now is that you're talking about embracing failure. Like failure is perceived to be this bad thing, right? Rock bottom of
Yeah.
your life. What is failure, really?
Yeah. So anytime things don't go the way we want them to go is failure, right? Like,
Mm,
if we can even, it's even spoken about in the gym, right? Doing sets to failure, right?
yeah.
So there can be these micro failures, right? And I'll tell you this, Troy, when I was training for hockey, I distinctly remember there was a day, I had this like hard ass trainer. And he pushed me really hard. I was like 18 years old. I distinctly remember we were doing like these drop sets, and I was like, I did my reps, and then the last set they dropped a bunch of weight, and you were supposed to do max reps, and I was like, say at like 15 reps on my max set, and I didn't realize the coach was nearby. And I was like, that's good enough. And I re racked the weights. And he's like, get that weight back on. Like, let's go. And it was just like, I didn't want to go to the point of failure ever. And so
Mm,
we can talk about this on any spectrum, like any part of the continuum here of failure, from like going to rock bottom, or just like, trying something out and making a mistake, right?
mm,
Like, so many people who have this like high performer mindset. And I know, Troy, you said there's like a mix of people listening, but I think everyone listening, if they're listening to this, they have this high performer mindset. So many of us are so afraid to show cracks in the armor, right? To make a mistake and have other people see that maybe we're not perfect, maybe we're not where we're trying to show we are. And this is Carol Dweck wrote kind of like an initial book called Mindset. This was kind of like the OG of mindset books, and she talked about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And this is the epitome of the fixed mindset, is this like, I'm performing on a stage, and if I make a mistake, everyone will see me for what I am, that I'm not good enough, that I can't hang, that all these things, versus the growth mindset, which is like, I'm playing in a sandbox and I can make mistakes and I can restart and I can knock it over and I can go again. That's the growth mindset. So I think when we talk about failure, that can be defined as anything from like making a small mistake to completely imploding and hitting rock bottom, and anything in between as well.
I suppose where you're getting at there is it's actually how you react to getting the failure, whether it depends where you
Good.
go after that.
One of the things that I've noticed recently, um, and I thought this too, that we often, when we're starting out or when we're not as successful as we want to be, we often think that the most successful people have made the least mistakes,
Mm,
right? But it's actually the most successful people make the same amount, if not more mistakes. They just learn from them faster,
mm,
right? They're, it's not that they avoid mistakes. It's that they take the feedback from the mistakes and the failures, and they use that to grow. And like, when you think about it, Troy, like, any time that you've really learned anything probably came from screwing something up, right? Like, that's the
mm,
best way we learn, is we make mistakes and we mess it up,
mm.
because that teaches us, as that's the quickest teacher.
I suppose and that's when we had our first call as well, is like to give people a bit of a background of like what I was actually like afraid of failing with. It was more so going out of my I suppose, my expertise where I was really good at content, where I didn't really mind if I made a video and it done bad, because I would learn that as a feedback loop. And I'd be like, okay, I understand that this is just a not style of content where people like. But where we had our first issue was when I was on calls with clients. I had a very limiting belief where I couldn't sell people a program of my worth, let's just say. So increase my prices, right?
Yeah.
And when I switched that mindset, that it's not actually a loss. Like when people say no to me, it's not necessarily a sign of failure. It's a sign of just like, it's a lesson. Whether it doesn't mean that I'm not good enough. It means that probably they're just not the person for the program, or it means that I just didn't use the strategy as good enough. So I need to sit back, watch the sales record, and see how I can do better. And I think, do you think, and this is a question I wanted to ask you because there's going to be a mixture here between males and females. Do you think every brain is like wired the same and everybody thinks that way? Or is it just more so for men? Or,
I think we get wired. This is kind of like you're asking kind of like a nature versus nurture question here, which is really good.
yeah.
And I've been actually been thinking about this quite a bit. I'm about to have a baby boy in a couple of months, and I've been thinking a lot about nature versus nurture. And I believe it's a combination. That being said, I am a strong believer that nurture is a huge piece of it. Um, and so to your question, I think it probably is slightly different between men and women
Mm,
because of the unfortunate social norms and way we're treated as children. But for everybody, men, women, and whatever, there is these things are ingrained in us when we're young. So this is where, and I don't have a solution to this, but I have a beef with school as the traditional system of school,
mm,
because school teaches you to look outside of yourself for validation that you're doing something right,
mm,
right? It teaches you to go, okay, I did this thing. Can you now judge me on this thing and tell me if I did okay? Right? It's like a report card is like a scoreboard, right? Where we're like, I have no idea if I did well here. I have no internal sense of validation. I need you to give me that validation.
mm,
And and then, you look at sports, right? There's a scoreboard, there's judges, right? All these things. So as kids, men, women, all of us high performers who want to win, want to please other people, want to impress other people, our parents, our coaches, our friends, we're looking externally all the time, right? And so when younger Troy or old version of Troy 1.0 would miss a sale, right? Maybe because he pitched a higher price point, he would think, well, this means that I'm not good enough. This means that I blew it. This means that now everybody's going to laugh at me, right? Which is crazy to think, but this is how our subconscious brain works, because it's been kind of quote unquote subliminally trained over time, over years and decades, to look for that external validation and to not recognize when, like, say, you have a great sales call, you have a breakthrough with somebody and they just don't have the money. Like, I would call that a success,
mm.
right? Because you changed somebody's life. They just didn't pay you for it yet.
Yeah.
Right. So I think I don't know if that answered the question. I went on a bit of a rant, but I hope you're cool with that.
I'm happy with that. One thing that I was going to ask you is, and this is because I can't take somebody else's, examples, but I can look at my past and maybe hopefully some people can relate to it. So I grew up in Ireland, which is quite similar to the UK mindset, where everybody's kind of like hating towards people that are going outside of comfort zone and seeking, I suppose, failure as a lesson. And that's something that I kind of relate to, is that everybody never really believed in me. They certainly do now. But
Yeah.
before, what is it in people's minds where they just won't allow somebody to go outside of comfort zone, or at least do something that they know deep down they're not able to do? If that's a right question.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of times, well, I'll say this in the context of, like, the people who doubted you or the people who were trying to hold you down, um, I would encourage them to turn the mirror around and
Mm,
look at themselves. Because what often happens is we will try to hold other people back from doing things that we're afraid that we know we could do, but we're afraid to do. And this is the old adage of the crabs in the bucket. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this, but some
mm,
listeners might not have. And, you know, there's this, I think it's hermit crabs. And if you put crabs in a bucket, um, you put like five, six of them in there. As one is trying to crawl out of the bucket, trying to crawl up the side out of the bucket, the other crabs will actually pull it down. They will actually pull it down back into the bucket.
mm,
And none of them can ever get out, even if there's no lid on the bucket, because they will actively pull each other down, trying to keep each other, quote unquote, safe.
mm,
Right. And so our parents will often do this, friends, other people who will say, no, don't do that. That's unsafe, right? They're not saying that, but that's how they feel, right? They're actually, these people are probably trying to protect you, but they're protecting you from what their limits are,
mm.
not what your limits are and what you know you could do, right? So I'll often, you know, if if people are projecting these negative beliefs or these negative mindsets or these fear-based things, I'll be like, what are they afraid of? Right?
Mm.
Because yes, sometimes what you and I do could probably be considered reckless. It you know,
Definitely is.
we go hard, man. Like
Yeah.
sometimes we just make these decisions where it's like, did you actually just do that? And it's like, well, yes, I did. And I'm willing to accept the consequences if it doesn't work out. And I'm also willing to accept all the greatness that comes with it if it does work out. Whereas most people, and again, our society, UK, Ireland, Canada, we have been conditioned, don't get me started on conspiracy theories here, but we have been conditioned through what I would call social programming to stay in the middle, stay mediocre, don't be recognized, don't be noticed, just float along in kind of like this like messy middle that doesn't really serve anybody in a big way, but keeps you safe, allows you to make your money, pay your taxes, and die. That's basically what we've been kind of conditioned to do.
Definitely. And I want to kind of stay on the topic of being a business owner because I feel like a lot of people can still take, you know, little mind bombs out of what we're actually saying about this because maybe somebody aspires to be one day, or maybe somebody's
Mm-hmm.
just trying to get their head out of the, rat race, as I like to call it, right?
Yeah.
So bringing it back, all the respect for my mother and father. They're the most supportive people ever. They're great. They're listening to this podcast. I know for a fucking fact they're listening to this podcast.
Hey,
But
mom and dad Sutton, how you guys doing? Good to talk to you.
But my point being is when I first started doing content or running my business back then, business, why is it that parents don't necessarily want you to do that, or at least they want to support you and hope that it happens, but it's more so like stay safe? I'm presuming
Yeah.
this goes back to be conditioned from even their parents.
Yeah. So I can't speak on your parents, but I can speak to my parents. So
Mm,
because I've experienced the exact same thing, Troy. So my my mom grew up. This is how kind of like blessed we are in this generation. My mom grew up in Canada. So those of you who don't know, Canada gets very cold.
mm,
In Canada, in a house with no heat and no running water. Okay. So like they had no money. My
mm,
dad grew up in England. He came over to Canada after my parents got married. Um, and they didn't have a whole lot of money. You know, his parents were barely making ends meet, right? So all four of my grandparents, okay, if you had asked either of my parents what their parents did for a living, they couldn't tell you. Like there was kind of like, well, laborer, taxi driver, like they kind of just kind of had odd jobs.
mm,
So like my parents come from a world where if you can have enough money to finish the month, that's a huge win. If you can own your own home and maybe even retire at some point in your life, you've got it made. So then I come along and I start going like, I'm going to create my own business and I'm going to, take all this risk, right? Where my parents' generation, probably your parents' generation, was conditioned to believe in the quote unquote American dream, right? Get a job with a pension, a steady, stable paycheck. And that was the dream. And like, kudos to my parents. They are living their quote unquote dream. They are now retired. They both get paid to be retired. They have a nice home. They can travel a few times a year. They are, they have done it. But their kind of like ceiling is so much lower because, first of all, because of what they grew up with, and like you said, how they were conditioned based on that, right? Like my mom grew up in a house where like there might not have been enough food for everybody. There was her and three sisters and the two parents who all needed to eat, and there might not have been enough food. That's very different than the house I grew up in,
Mm,
right? So I think, and this is the whole thing, right? We can't blame other people for trying to quote unquote keep us safe. And they're
mm,
doing the best. I always say about my parents and about a lot of other people who, are middle class mindset, I call it, is they're doing the best they can with the tools that they have, with what they were given.
mm,
And I think that that's an important piece. And all I can do with my parents in particular is try and slowly show them and again prove to them that what I'm doing is just as viable as being a police officer or being a teacher or whatever. In
mm,
fact, it has probably more viability today because there's no ceiling on the income and I have the freedom to do this work from wherever I want. And once like it's starting to click for my parents now, 10, 12, 15 years in, but it's taken time and a lot of evidence for them to kind of wrap their heads around it.
definitely. I hope that answers a lot of people's questions when it comes to like maybe they're in the same position. Let's
Yeah.
just say somebody is in a position, which I would say maybe I was at one stage. I was just too I don't even know what I was to admit it, but whatever I was that. But let's just say somebody is there, they're feeling very like vulnerable at the moment because they have no support. Definitely not in where they're from, because as you say, crabs in a bucket. And their
Yeah.
parents are not budging, where my parents did. They budged when they saw the success and they're like, maybe this is something you should keep expressing. Once they
Right.
just saw one payment come through, they were like, that's like a week's wage. What?
Yeah. This is crazy.
This is
Yeah.
crazy. And then the belief started to come, but some people just won't get around to believing it. So if somebody is like alone right now, how do they switch their mindset and actually start becoming more like us? Because I can't tell them.
Yeah. I mean, listening to podcasts like this. So one of the things that I did when I was starting my business, I would listen to podcasts. I would go to live events. I would do my best to get around people that inspire me. And so my encouragement to people is like, and you don't have to do this even in person. Like some of my biggest mentors, I've still never met them, right? Like they mentored me through podcasts, through Facebook posts back in the day, through Instagram. Um, they mentored me in ways they may never know, through books,
Mm,
right? There are so many. You could have a full on business mentor on YouTube right now for free if you wanted
mm,
to. So my encouragement to people who are kind of feeling that way, I mean, if you can get out and go to live events like, the ones that Charlie Johnson hosts or the ones that people host around fitness and things like that, you will, more than anything, the biggest value you will find is you will meet other people who think like you. And
mm,
that's wild. A friend of mine once said, get your ass where your heart is. Like go find the people who are like you and then hang out with them, spend time with them, do what you can to be with them. Like some of my closest friends now are people that I talk to on Zoom and I talk to them, once a month or once every couple of weeks. I call them my closest friends, and I've met them in person once or twice. So
Mm.
you can find your quote unquote tribe. The other thing that I'll even kind of like just segue into is kind of like listening to yourself. So we often outsource a lot of our confidence and self-esteem and things to the people that we trust, our parents, other friends, things like that. But you can actually build that trust and that belief within yourself by just listening. Like everyone says, follow your heart, follow your gut. Like listen to it. Like listen to your heart, listen to your gut. And what do I mean by that? Well, do you feel deep inside of yourself like you're going in the right direction? Do you feel like this is what you want out of your life? Is this the path that you want to be on? And if you do feel that way, then it's your job to like move mountains and make that happen, right? Because I'm sure if you're in like a 9 to 5 that maybe you don't like very much or whatever, or you're in a place fitness wise where you don't want to be, it's it's not going to be easy, and a lot of people may not understand you, but you're going to have to drive pretty hard and push pretty hard to get out of that place. Just, I mean, I was there. I was in that place and it was like, this isn't where I want to be. I could feel it. This is not why I'm been put on this crazy spinning rock. It's not to do this, it's to do something greater. And if you feel that way, then I encourage you to lean into that. Go find the people, find the environments that serve that, and keep leaning in.
I suppose that's where we find a quote is like choose your hard. Of course, it's hard staying out of shape or it's hard staying in a job that you don't like, but it's also extremely fucking hard to change that. And I mean, I suppose you could suffer 20 years of, trying to build it and change that, or you could spend 20 years living in pain. But I
Yeah.
suppose what funds the type of thing of like lack of focus, lack of motivation. I suppose motivation would be the biggest one you'd probably hear from your clients. I've no motivation to do this. I've no motivation to do that. Is that just because of the people they're hanging around with or the people that they spend the most time with is because of temptation, the things that they're doing? Or
I think that's part of it. And I think it leads to a bigger problem. So I have no motivation or, oh, a lot of people may like, why isn't this working? Why can't I make this work? Right. That's when I know it's subconscious, when it's like, none of this makes sense. Why isn't this working? It's like, well, you should have motivation to get what you want. Right.
mm,
So that's when, so there's this great quote from a guy named Joe Dispenza. If you want to lean into any of the work that I do, go check out Joe Dispenza. That says, our nervous system, like our internal system, will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. Right. So I'll often say to people, if they're just like, I have no motivation, I can't get moving, I don't know why this isn't working. I'll say to them, what feels scary or unsafe about where you want to go, right? And on the flip side, what feels safe and comfortable about where you are now, right?
mm,
For me, to make the amount of money that, like, I'm still working through this, just so everybody knows, to make the amount of money that I want to make and to be at the level that I want to be in terms of the type of human being that I want to become, that I'm working to become, there are going to be a lot of people who are gone, who
mm,
don't hang. Like, and I have to come to terms with the fact that I won't be accepted and won't be understood by a lot of people in my life.
mm,
And that's scary, right? A lot of people, for example, oh, I want to be more successful on social media or build my business or whatever. Even if you want to be more fit, for a lot of people, it's very scary and unsafe to be seen, to be truly seen, right? Because maybe they've been seen before in a setting where they were, vulnerable and someone made fun of them or someone made them feel like being seen is unsafe. So I'll encourage people, like, if you're not where you want to be and you're like, I can't find the motivation, I just can't find the drive, this is crazy. That's because something about it feels unsafe. Something about it feels scary to your subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind always knows the score and always kind of like is putting that governor, that brake pedal on if the subconscious and the conscious aren't aligned, right? So you can have the biggest goals ever. You can want to make millions of dollars. You can want to be shredded and do 100 pull-ups and all these things, right? Consciously. But if your subconscious brain isn't in alignment with that, and something about that is scary or unsafe, your subconscious brain is 95% of your brain. It's not going to let it happen. It's
Mm,
going to block you. And that's where the work that I do allows you to reframe that subconscious mind and get it in alignment with, like, recognize the patterns that aren't serving you and get the subconscious mind in alignment with the conscious so that you can go do what you want.
for sure. And would you say, or would you recommend? I'm not sure how much you know about this or how much you practice it yourself, but more so gratification or well, what's it? There's another one. There's gratification and manifesting. Would you recommend much of that, or?
Yeah. I mean, the kind of steps that I recommend would be number one, awareness. So, what are these things? So, anybody listening, go back, review your life. What are some of the stories and some of the beliefs that you have told that you've been telling yourself about yourself? And the easiest way we can do this is like, what are some inflection points from your life? Maybe some big things that happened, parents divorce, getting fired, getting made fun of and bullied. All these things can be big inflection points. It doesn't necessarily have to be trauma or things like that. It can just be times when you felt a certain way. And
Mm.
you'll probably remember these pretty quickly. Like there's parts of seventh grade that I remember that I don't remember anything else about seventh grade, right?
Mm.
So you remember these things. And then the question is, what did I make that mean about myself in that moment, right? Oh, I'm not good enough. I have to change who I am to fit in or whatever, right? That's when we're going to become aware of these stories. Then the work is in, as you mentioned, some of this like manifesting and things like that. The work is in changing those stories, actively changing those stories. Some of my favorite methods of becoming more mindful are gratitude practice, like you said. What are things that I'm grateful for? What are things that I'm um, happy about in my life?
Mm.
Journaling, just journaling your thoughts. It's like having a conversation with yourself. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people don't let their minds settle and just have conversations with themselves.
Mm.
And then the third one, and the one that I recommend the most, is like looking for evidence that you are who you say you are, right? That you are who you want to be. So I'll go on a bit of a rant about our brains here. There's a part of our brain called the reticular activating system. The reticular activating system tells your conscious brain what to focus on. So anyone who's ever bought a new car, you see that car everywhere, right? Anyone who's ever you want to buy a house, you see for sale signs everywhere. That's your reticular activating system saying, hey, you want to focus more on this? Let's do it. The problem with the reticular activating system is when we have a belief about ourselves. Let's say we believe we're not good enough, right? The reticular activating system will go, okay, I'm going to show you tons of evidence of that. And it's going to actually avoid the evidence that shows you are good enough and focus only on the evidence that you are not good enough. But if we can become aware and shift that story in your brain and then actively and consciously look for evidence that you are good enough, that you can, be a millionaire, that you can have abs, whatever it is, you start to find that evidence. And when you find that evidence, you start to find more evidence. And then, as Abraham Hicks says, the better it gets, the better it gets. It starts building on itself. So I would encourage gratitude. I would encourage journaling. The number one thing, if you take nothing else away from this, write down every single day one thing that you're proud of yourself for. I call this a brag book. You can brag to yourself. You don't have to brag to other people. Okay. But if you write down one thing you're proud of yourself for every day, you start to train your reticular activating system to look for the positive things you're doing every single day, to look for the things you're doing that move you in the direction of where you want to go. That's going to start to change the way your brain thinks and the way your brain looks at the world.
For sure. One thing that I want to finish up on is something you mentioned to me before we started this podcast today is you have a book coming, which I'll be buying. So tell me more about it. I'm excited.
One sale. Yes.
You've made it.
I've made it. Yeah, I got a book coming out. It's called Consciouspreneur. I called it that because I had to pick a lane. But anybody who's not an entrepreneur business owner, you can get a ton out of this book. And actually, you can figure out if you're going to get a lot out of it for free. And I'll tell you how in a second. So it's called Consciouspreneur: What to Do When the Hard Work Stops Working. And I think a lot of us have experienced that where we're like, why isn't the hard work? Why can't I just grind more? Why isn't this working anymore? And that's because you have to start looking internally. You have to turn your focus inward. And that's what the book is all about. So if people want to, the book's going to be coming out in probably early 2025. But if you want to get on the pre-sale list where you'll find out about it first and get a pre-sale price, you can also get access to a free course called Consciouspreneur Academy. It's got like 25 video trainings, a bunch of worksheets and all that stuff to help you work through this stuff. Okay. So Troy's going to, I think, put that in the show notes on how to do that. Literally a couple of clicks and you can get this free course. But I'm so excited about the book because it takes a whole bunch of my stories and all the places that I screwed up and puts lessons on them and helps people figure out their own stories and where they may be limiting themselves.
That sounds awesome. And for anybody listening in their start of their journey, the best thing you could possibly do is invest into your problems, I think. You know, throw money at it and it'll eventually go away, as Charlie says as well.
Throw money at your problems, they will go away. I totally agree.
For sure. And if people want to just follow you for any type of like day-to-day content, which I like, so where did he follow you?
Two places. I'm really focused on YouTube right now. So at Coach Gavin McHale on YouTube, there's a super popular daily money mindset visualization for anyone who wants to make more money on there. And then at Gavin McHale one on Instagram, I'm sharing a lot of snippets from my talks and from YouTube and all that kind of stuff on Instagram.
Nice. To make it easier for everybody, I'll just put it in the description below. You can click the link and head up to the profile. But with that being said, hope you took a lot of information out today. And thank you so much, Gavin, for coming.
Troy, I really appreciate you having me on, man. Thank you.
Of course.